Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about our childhood, the way in which we are raised, the experiences that we have gone through, many of the stories, the traumas, the deficits, the really drastic times that we have lived in. Could it be in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s as we reflect back in history? It truly is saying, wow, we were totally different people then. Are people now in the year 2025 engaging in these same types of raising their children and the way in which the world is going on and the history in which is going on in our society? Truly no. But what's happening is that a lot of us, as myself, being almost 70, we were reflecting back on our life and we were saying, look at that, look at that, look at that. What we're really talking about is how our life experiences have played out in history and the collective. Many people, if you went to a neighbor's house or a priest or a church, or if you went to a school, or if you went to a therapist or to a doctor or your neighbors, everybody was touched by what was going on in history, and history also replayed in our own lives with anger, with violence, with people having a lack of. It was all post-war, and we didn't even recognize it, that was the origin of our stories. Today my guest is Neal King. His book is a memoir, Trauma is a Thief. Neal will be sharing his story of his life, how it originated back in the 50s and 60s, and how it truly has changed his life and gotten him to the point where he is today to really do the work. Neal, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here.
So glad to have you, Neal. I think when we truly look back at it, so many people are saying, well, I'm looking back at my life, and I must have all these things that I, quote, did wrong, or it was horrible, or it really made me into this, that, and the other, and it's a reason why I am today. Are we not truly looking back at history?
We are. We're looking at our personal history, and through that lens, we're looking at the history of the time.
Yeah. I think so many times people, as I work with patients at end of life, they're saying, this, and this happened. I said, I know. I can feel your pain, and can we let that go and understand everyone is doing the best they can within each parameter of their life. But I don't think we can do that unless we've actually looked at our trauma in the first place. Perhaps?
Well, one of the things I talk about is I think trauma maintains an energy inside of us until we release it, until we find a way to release it, yes.
Yeah. I really think that was important because don't you think sometimes people say, well, I don't want to go there again? That's a very common comment.
That's right. Too painful, been there, don't want to touch it, don't want to revisit it. A lot, especially family members who've read my book. They'll reach a certain point and they say, Neal, I'm sorry, I just have to set this aside for now. And I'll say, everybody at your own pace, don't feel obligated to read it. But my belief is you got to touch it before you can release it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you have to... it's not about ownership of it. Sometimes people use that word, a little loosely. You have to own it. Well, we kind of all went through it. I've had trauma in my life. You've had it in yours. It's very clearly depicted in your book. But when you talk about the word ownership, I think that's saying, do I need to carry the baggage of the suffering forever? And what we're saying is ownership, the trauma is not your identity. We are so much more than that. Perhaps?
We are so much more than that, and the trauma can prevent us from being our full selves and our true selves. And that's a part of what I've discovered through my own process is I feel lighter now than I ever have at any other time in my life after having written this book and exposed it was buried under layers of shame where I was blaming myself and thought I was deficient in some way. And the shame is really the enemy. The shame has to be thrown off in order for one to sort of reemerge as one was meant to be in the first place.
Yeah. I think as a collective, we are truly learning so much more about ourselves. You and I having this conversation today would have never happened even 20 years ago,
No.
And it certainly wouldn't be voiced, a long time ago. We would have been banned, or banned, excommunicated, whatever it needed to be, that would be done. I think sometimes when people look back at our life, let's go back to the 50s and 60s, and what was going on then? That was when you were born, and that was when I was born. I can remember the violence, the alcohol abuse. People were very illiterate then. We think back on that and we say that can't be. I'm sure you and I, we talk to people and they say, oh, that's not really true. That didn't happen. But my ancestors barely even went to 8th grade. There wasn't information about how you can be able to learn or become educated or to be able to know more. Don't you think we were very restricted as human beings in those earlier years?
I think we were, and a big part of it is that all of these secrets lived generation to generation within the family or within the church or within, and they had a very dark power. But to give voice to them, attach words to them, was something that, I agree with you, only began to happen in fairly recent time, and it's been very powerful. And my own opinion is that today, a part of the stark divide that we're experiencing in this country and in most of the West has to do with people who retain that dark, holding on to the dark essentially, and not touching it, not releasing it, versus people who are finished living that way and electing to live more openly and more wholly, and it frightens the people holding on to the dark.
Yes, I think that truly is about the separation, because how many times have we heard people say, my mother told me, my father told me, my priest told me, my church told me, my school told me, and this is the way I live. And I believe in what we call the truth. And they say, this is the truth because it is such. And they've held on to those rocks and those stories and that dogma throughout eons, perhaps?
Yeah, and I still think that's going on amongst people who have convinced themselves that they're more comfortable holding on to traditional roles, values, truths, institutions, but they're holding on to an illusion, and it is in some ways scarier to approach disentangling all of these threads that live inside of us through our trauma. And finding out what's on the other side. That's a scary proposition for a lot of people. But my hope in writing this book is that I at least give one person's example of how you can do that and survive it and come out better on the other side. And I believe strongly, as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist, as a human being who's lived this, that's the path that allows you to live most freely again and become your true self. Live most fully.
I think also, too, Neal, let's go back for a second in the beginning. And I distinctly remember when I was reading in your book, something caught my attention. And your mother had said, don't tell Roy. And I can distinctly remember that in my own life. Whatever happens within these four walls, it never leaves outside of here. And even though we had obliterated, chaos from corner to corner within those four walls, it didn't matter. When you walked out that door, you looked perfect. You sounded perfect. Everything around you had to be perfect, because you had to give that projection as such. I think that was very much a calling of the times. If you remember, everybody needed to have a White House, picket fence, car in the driveway, so to speak. And, just as you shared on the cover of your book, with that picture, I mean, when I looked at it, I said, whoa, I think I might have one of those. I don't know. But it's all about how we look to others, perhaps?
Yeah, we were. I mean, I chose that photograph because it's us as the picture perfect little kids with our new little puppy. And you looking at the image, you would never guess, what happens behind the closed doors. And I mentioned in the book that my role in the family was to be the hero, exactly what you're talking about, to be the ambassador to the world, saying, look what a nice family we have. This nice boy must come from a nice family because he's a good student, because he's very polite. And nobody even said to me, here's your job. I just absorbed. I knew that this family had to have somebody go out into the world and present it differently than it really was.
Right. It's for my own story, I can distinctly remember from the age of fourth grade all the way through till, I went to college, I used to play the Latin Mass on the pipe organ, with the priests in the Catholic Church, 10, 12 Masses a week. I guess I was the one, just as you, being the hero, I was supposed to be the savior, bringing God, fixing it, whatever. And it was incredible, the amount of... You look back and you say, was I under pressure then? And I say, you know what? I wasn't under pressure. I just did it. And I kind of was devoid of maybe any other outside influences. Like, I do not sing well at all, but yet here I was singing with the Latin Mass with the priest. It was my position, so to speak. Do you think perhaps when you share, just as you did in your memoir, there were many times and instances it was your position to be able to have that experience, to be able to talk about it later?
Quite possibly. I mean, I think I talk about looking back, realizing that I had developed a mask that I wore for the world that masked what was really happening for me. And on some level, I do think that my intuition, which I think is a powerful form of intelligence, I talk about it in the book, led me into circumstances and into situations and into experiences that ultimately helped me heal and understand what had gone on. I think that's kind of what you're suggesting, is that by following the path suggested by the intuition. I think a lot of people are frightened by that. I found that very exhilarating. And still today, I'm very curious about what's around the next corner, what else I might learn, what else I might discover. But I've learned to really trust that kind of inner voice that says, now go this way, now turn left, now take this path.
Yes. I think truly, sometimes I know for myself, and perhaps maybe you can attest to this, sometimes when we turn left or right, we hit into another wall, and we hit into another devastating experience. I know for myself, I've done that hundreds of times, and then we go through, we have all the feelings, we get bumped up, we get bruised, we get almost annihilated, and then we come out of it, and then I look back at it and I'll say, whew, I can look in reflection and say, whoa, look at where that took me, and look at where I am today. And I think that's the purpose of writing a memoir, of writing out your feelings and your stories, is to be able to have that reflection, because that reflection can then say, that is my story of my human existence. I made it through. I am truly healed in this loving soul within. Isn't that what we're trying to capture, is our loving soul within, and know that it's been with us this whole time?
Absolutely. An analogy that comes to my mind listening to you just then is, I used to be an avid downhill skier, and you can't love downhill skiing if you're not willing to take some nasty falls along the way. And it's only because, and I took many, and it's only because you're willing to take those falls that you experience the exhilaration of experiencing the beauty of the mountain, of the speed going down, of reaching the bottom and thinking, wow, I did it. It's the only way. If you're standing at the top of the mountain going, I can't do this because I might fall, you're never going to move off that spot. Yeah.
And you know what I think is really important to really bring up too, Neal, is that people who have experienced all the abuses, physical, emotional, sexual, consciously, unconsciously, whatever it could be, whatever has taken a hit to your body, mind, and soul in an abusive form. In other words, meaning that is not what I'm feeling. Does not feel good to me. This is not right. And it's coming from an outside source. I think we just will have to stop and say, whoa, I see that, I feel that, I know that somewhere in my psyche. And that's your innate self trying to speak, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a huge accomplishment and revelation when someone arrives at the point where they realize that there's stuff they've been carrying that is not their innate self.
Right.
I worked with a therapist for a period of time. I went through a variety of different therapies. And in one session, he revealed to me there was a flower above the surface. And then we talked about kind of parting the earth that held up the flower to see what was underneath. And as you parted the soil, at the bottom was this brilliant diamond that once you reached it and moved the soil away, it was radiant. And that was my core. That was my divine spirit, however you want to think about it. And that session revealed to me that the art and the work of moving the soil away, moving the dirt away, moving whatever the obstruction is away, gets you to that essence, which is so powerful.
Absolutely. And don't you think truly, Neal, you could look at it that you may have been, as you labeled it, a hero in your family because you've survived to this time. There have been many people who have been taken out, so to speak, and never got to this point of this soul evolution, like your parents or those before you, your grandparents or those others in your family, a brother and a sister. I know for myself, I look back and I say, gosh, if they just really had the information, wouldn't their life be so different? But then I look at it and I say, but they weren't meant to have that information to make their life different. They were meant to be that peg in the wall, so to speak, so we could all evolve as in a collective. In other words, you and I being here today having this conversation isn't a testament to all of the souls that are evolving once they let go of that human story. So you're really still helping and surviving and bringing along all of your ancestors, because even though they passed on, they shed the story, but you still have their energy within you. So you're healing that whole lineage. That's what ancestral healing is all about. Yes?
And it's very powerful. I absolutely agree with you. I mentioned in the book that I do have some survivor guilt, that I am still here. But I also, along the way, feel people have said to me, I'm not going to. You have to live for us too. You have to articulate the experience that is I'm not going to be able to articulate. My brother drank himself to death at 47. I'm the only one still alive from my family. Sometimes I think, well, that's unfair to them. I mean, why? But I feel the responsibility of that, and I feel I hadn't thought of it in exactly the terms you're talking about. But healing the lineage, there's so much to that. Trauma. I say in the early part of the book that trauma has. I come from a generation of trauma sufferers of trauma. Trauma was visited upon generations of my ancestors and of course would manifest itself in my grandparents' lives and in my parents' lives and in our family. But it's right. It's true. Somebody has to sort of get that. Now, why you, why me, and not the others? I don't have an answer to that.
Right. I truly see it as evolution because, when I look back, my ancestors came from Polish, Irish, and Lithuanian. Wow, it was devastating then. And every attempt that I've made to go back to do genetic stuff, to be able to find information or to retrace has been totally blocked, like with this solid steel wall, almost as if I've gone off in Never Never Land. I can never find anything. And I asked myself the question, I said, why is that? Why did that happen? Why am I not able to gain or walk through their steps or be able to feel or know their stories? And it's because just that. I think it's important to understand, Neal, is that it's just a human story. It is not them. It is not their identity, because their identity is their soul energy spirit. So it lives on. And if we think of that, we say, wow, those are just the places that energy has been going along in essence. And can I see how they are always with me? I've always been with them. And if we let go of that story, that's how we evolve. You know, so many times I will have patients at end of life and they'll say, oh, well, I have regrets about this, that, or the other. I need to do this, that, or the other. I've even had a woman, she was barely even eating. And I said, honey, what is wrong? Why are you not having groceries? She's got all of these oil stocks and everything, and she owns a house and all, but she won't spend a dime. She says, I'm leaving it to my children because I didn't raise them like they should have been raised. And I'm leaving it sort of as a penance. And I said, you know what's going to happen when you leave? And you squeeze through that door. They're going to go out and have a party. They're not going to think a bit about it.
Right.
But you're here suffering. And why are you here suffering? So the answer in the question is, can we see that our story and our life that we're going through is a story? It's a human experience for the moment, but we are all eternal souls. Perhaps, maybe that sets a lot of people free. I know, many times that my patients are like, well, holy heck, go out and get me something to eat. Go do this, go do that. I'm not worried about it anymore because they see it's a story to release. Just as your story in your book about the memoir, what can we release of our human experience? Is that not what we're truly asking?
Yes, I knew this when I wrote the book, that people would have this reaction, but one of the strongest reactions that people have had to the book is, oh my God, you're so candid. You tell us your secrets. You pull back the curtain entirely, not just on your family, but on your own, psychology and the kinds of things that you have felt a need to hide. And it's literally an open book. And I said, yes, because that's the only way to really throw off the shame, to really emerge from that horrible darkness and heaviness that has held down generations and killed my own family. So, but it's not easy because we live in a culture that perpetuates shaming others for their difference, for their looks, for their money or not lack of money, for their way they talk, for the it's such an ugly but powerful weapon that we use as a society to ultimately to keep ourselves feeling superior to others. But it's an illusion. It's silliness.
So can I ask you, Neal, perhaps is it not the idea that the story that we put upon our feelings, the story that we create, we feel, we generate, is all based upon words and judgments, right? So if we say that, it's a word or a judgment that's coming from where? Others are judging us? Are we judging ourselves? Are we taking that story and saying, this is what I think, and then we live inside of our own self-manufactured box? I know for myself, people have said to me, oh, well, my gosh, I would start to tell them something, and they would check out. They weren't listening. They didn't pay attention. Do you know what I mean? They weren't interested. Or still others would say, oh, my gosh, I'm so sorry for your suffering. And I'm going, I didn't suffer. I'm just sharing an experience. Are we creating our own box that says do not touch and unable to process these as just experiences and keeping ourselves maybe in a very tenacious kind of tether line, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, a thing that you mentioned earlier, that you're nearing 70, I'm nearing 80. And part of the freedom of that is that A, I'm still here, but B, I just don't care what other people think. I'm not working anymore. I'm retired. I have the freedom to sort of just not care. And that means that I don't carry the judgments of others so much, but it means that I don't judge myself so much. And I think the power of story, it's a word we're using a number of times in this conversation, throughout human history, the oral tradition, is that it is the ability of certain words to resonate, to strike a chord within others, because ultimately our experience is universal. And we resonate with story because it's not just tells us something, but it activates something inside of us. And my hope is that my book, as expose, as memoir, as testimony, however you want to think of it, it liberates others to not care, to shed the burden that we carry around inside of us because we're so worried about what others think of us.
I absolutely loved your book for one reason. The reason is that you went into sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, you name it, every single one of those characteristics. And what you really did is you gave it a name. You said, this is what it looked like from inside the box. This is what it felt like inside my heart, my mind, and my soul. This is what my body and my physical entity went through. And you know what? I'll be darned if it is who I am. It is not who I am. Yeah. And I think that's what you claimed by saying, this is not who I am.
Yep.
Just as I shared, these are only experiences we go through. However, what I think your greatest gift by writing this book, and I hope others are able to understand, you say, wow, okay, it may or may not have been my experience, but it triggered whatever my experience is and allows me to now to start processing it. So hopefully, Neal, you will send up and maybe perhaps write a guidebook to this so that others can say, what is my trigger for me? What is it showing up as? How do I walk through that process? And then how do I look at it in reflection and say, well, holy smokes, I get it. I got it. I can let it go. And then what I always say to people is, it's time to find your wings. Perhaps?
I like that. Yeah. It's I try to say that I don't mean to present myself as the poster boy for recovery from trauma. I do attempt, as you say, to offer my experience as an example of how one person got thrown out into the world by a very traumatic early life without a guidebook, without a compass, without a map, and just had to figure it as you go through. And for some reason, it's been my destiny to have the chutzpah, the help, the stubbornness, whatever, to keep going and to plow through the muck. But I hope that there are 2, 3, 4 people, whatever, who take that as like, oh well, if he can do it, then I can do it. And he did it this way, but I would have to do it this way, because I think each of our paths is unique.
Yes.
But the idea is the same: is to get you through, or to get ourselves through that crap that we allow to continue living in us, and to throw it off and to emerge from it.
What I truly see you and I as, many times it's been, annotated in the spiritual literature, is that there's forerunners. There's light workers, those people that are ahead of their time. I'm sure you've heard it in your own work. I've heard it. People say to me all the time, gosh, Jeanette, I can remember I was even young and I was hearing these words. Gosh, Jeanette, I don't even understand what you're talking about. You must be ahead of your time. I hear that constantly. But what you and I are talking about is about being able to be forerunners and experiencing these things, share it in reflection, be able to say we're so much more. We are now what I call seeding others to be able to say, oh goodness, okay, we're coming along, here we come. So in other words, I see it almost as you and I potentially have created this bridge. We're on the other side already. You and I have done our healing work. We've kind of got it. But we kind of have to extend our hands across the bridge to help others to be able to join us. And when you look at it and you see that visual and you say, oh, thank you. And you see all of this shedding kind of muck behind them on the other side of the bridge. You say, it's going to be okay. Isn't that truly the gift that many who have been light workers, forerunners, people who have learned what healing is all about, you and I, and as we share, it's all about saying it's going to be okay, and that's the greatest gift to humankind that we can possibly give at this time?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot to that. In an earlier interview that I had with a mental health professional in the UK, he asked me to speak about the whole dynamic of the wounded healer. And I said, well, I'm a wounded healer, and my wounds make me a better healer and make me more dedicated to healing and more deeply dedicated to healing, not just my own, but anybody who I can, in your image, reach across and offer a hand to. I'm there. And that's, I was supposed to be a lawyer and a politician, and the morning of the LSAT to get up and take the law school exam, I just stayed in my bed, and my friends came in the dormitory and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not going to be a lawyer." And somehow I knew that wasn't my calling. And I became a teacher, and ultimately, I became a psychologist, and that's my avenue to basically to profess my calling to heal.
It's so interesting you said that, Neal, because being as a psychic medium myself, I'm sure I can reflect this back to you, is that when you wanted to be the lawyer, you wanted to learn right and wrong and to punish those. So in essence, you say, oof, did I really want to do that? And then your soul said, do you really want to punish those?
Yeah.
Do you really want to know right or wrong? You really want to heal yourself. You're not really looking for vengeance. So your soul knew that vengeance was not the way in which you were going to perpetuate in this world. And then you learned, how can we heal the mind? How can we take it on other venues? And that's how your professions expanded. I know for myself, I was an early dental hygienist, for 25 years. And when I look back at that, people say, oh, you just clean teeth, blah, 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 that kind of thing, And I distinctly remember, when you were signing up to go to college, it was, oh, yeah, that's what women do. They're either going to be a dental hygienist or a nurse. That's all women can do,
Right.
But I distinctly remember the last time that I did it, and I kind of took it back in reflection, and I do this every few years. I look at my life in reflection, and I distinctly remember this was a characteristic that I had. Every patient that I put back in my chair, I would look distinctly into their eyes and connect with their soul, because the eyes is the soul. And I always did it with every single person. And there were two people that I had married that were my patients, and I remember distinctly one. It was this big gold bursting sun, and it was the most glorious universe I've ever seen. And I remember another. It was totally dead, and it was devoid. So the point is that our soul journey just has so much more to offer to us if we look at it. Just as yours, did you want to be vengeance, right or wrong? Your soul said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it took you on another journey. Mine said, okay, we're done looking at souls. You've already connected to what? Maybe over, I think it was several 100,000 that I've done, with that. So I did my soul work then. I'm done with that. And now I'm on to something else. So I think sometimes people will say, but that was a waste in our life, or I didn't get the message, or I didn't do something right. Look at where I am now. We really can find the gifts in our stories if we want to, perhaps.
And the moments. I mean, my experience is, and I really have been looking forward to talking with you, because my sense was that we would find a real affinity, which I believe we have. Is that you can find yourself in any moment, like the dental hygienist. I think you put a lot of people in that chair and they relax, and there's an intimacy. There can be an intimacy in that brief interaction that has nothing to do with teeth. And I was a bartender for years, and it was I put myself through school waiting tables and tending bar. Well, somebody sits down at the bar and orders a drink, and out comes the most intimate details of their life. And we'll have another drink, and then it intensifies, and then they'll say, okay, see ya. But that's really, a cathartic moment for them often. I mean, sometimes it gets a little carried away, and they should have stopped many drinks ago, but often it's an avenue for them to release something in a healing way with a receptive other person, and not think of it in those terms at all. It's why pubs are so much a part of the culture in Ireland and England, So I live now more like in the moment, whoever I happen to encounter and be available to, and it's just a soul in life bumping into other souls. It's not as formal as when I was a therapist or a teacher or a bartender even, or anything else, but it's still the nature of encountering others and hopefully inviting and being invited. I'm not done.
Right.
I still have, as long as I'm still alert, alive, and above ground, my work goes on. But that whole process of becoming.
Yes, I think truly, as circling back to what we said before, is that we opening doors. That's what we're doing. We're opening doors. We're allowing others to be able to say, it's safe. We're extending our hand across the bridge and saying it's going to be okay. That's all we've done. We've done it in different ways. We've done it in different professions. We've done it in different words. We've done it in our own experiences, perhaps. And that's our, I would call it, that's our mission, and we're here to serve. And I think when sometimes people say, oh, my trauma had another reason, it was to get me down and blah, 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 blah. All of that is a different conversation. When all of a sudden you somehow flip the coin, so to speak, and you start seeing it as a gift. Your trauma was a gift. How did it get me here? Well, now I'm able to help others. I'm able to flip the conversation. It was so intense. It was so horrific. It was so physically destroying. It was so consciously explosive that I decided to flip the coin and say, just as you did, you didn't go for the LSAT test. Just as for me, I just said, I'm done.
Yeah.
We flipped the coin. And now we're able to say, this is how we did it. And that's what your book is truly all about. And that's what our conversation was about today.
That's right. Yeah.
I think sometimes people are afraid, and what we really want to say is that, yes, it is awesome, fearful. I can attest to you, and I'm sure you could probably say the same. There's many times I've hidden in the corner. There's many times I said, I'm not talking, I'm going away, or I don't exist. And even in our conscious mind, we said, I'm shutting it down. I'm not here anymore. I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that. But then we somehow get pushed over the edge to be able to do that. And we say, I got up the next day and I still have a breath of life. Isn't that what we want to give to others, is that the breath of life is always there?
Yeah, and I do struggle with the fact that many people get destroyed by their trauma. They get drowned by it. They're not able to, and that there's pain in that, especially since many of my loved ones, that's been the case. But it's also true. I talk in the book. I struggled with depression, social anxiety. I made a suicide attempt in my 20s. It's not like it's been a bed of roses all the way through.
Right.
But it's like I used to body surf a lot. I grew up in Southern California, and sometimes if you catch the wave wrong, you get tumbled around and bounced off the bottom, and you're not even sure which way is up when you finally can touch the bottom again. But in my life, each time I have found the bottom and be able to stand up and inhale and go back for more, kind of thing. And it's a bit mysterious to me, but I take it as a gift that my trauma has led me to be who I am, and as a responsibility, as we're talking about, that it's not just for me, that it has a purpose for others.
Absolutely. Well, I think also, too, Neal, the idea is that we're here to live another day, and that's truly what it's all about. I think many of our listeners will be able to find some tips and inspiration, what we talked about today, and just to know that we, too, have been through many of these experiences, and we could share our stories. You and I could probably talk forever about our stories and our experiences.
I think we could.
And as I say, we're going to make it through this okay. In closing, I always share in the show that, my own family with my children, my son tried to commit suicide over 13 times, and with drugs, and we have alcohol, and we have all this other abuse stuff, even with the children. But I find they came to me to be able to assist and be their guardian, so to speak. In other words, just to stand here and say, it's going to be okay, keep going. And they, too, have now found the other side of the other coin. And they stepped into their mission and their service. They're now, one is a doctor, one is another helping other people with homelessness, and another one is helping others with the Mexicans and the cartels and the children and all of that going on in California, and helping children say, what is my life about now? So I think the idea is that can we give value to our life? And that's what you're sharing. There is value of your life, don't you think, after all of the experiences you've had?
Absolutely. It's never felt richer. It's never felt, like I said earlier, I feel lighter and I feel more alive. And I'm going to be 80 in a couple of years. And, I used to think 80 was ancient and that life was over by then. But in many ways, that's not my experience. So,
well, Neal, it was a pleasure to have you with us here today. Could you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work?
The title of the book is Trauma is a Thief, as we've mentioned. It's easily available on Amazon. And there's actually my email address is at the back of the book if people read it and wanted to make contact. I no longer do psychotherapy, but I would be available for a brief interaction, and I have a small consulting practice where I work with individuals, families, and organizations on life transitions. That's my focus today.
Very good. Well, Neal, it was such a pleasure to have you with us here today to share, because I think your mission in stepping into service is absolutely, many times people are saying, how do I get there? And the answer is just follow along. So we thank you so much for sharing.
Well, thank you, Jeanette, very much for the invitation. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely and would welcome another opportunity in the future at some point. So.
Oh, we absolutely will be. When you get that guidebook going, Neal, we want to know.
Okay, fair enough.
Very good. If you'd like to find out more information about Neal King, again, the book is Trauma is a Thief, a memoir. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page for more information. And it is about being able to say, you're going to be okay no matter what you're going through. We promise it is going to be okay. The difference is we are going to say you need to find others who are willing to share their stories and to be able to guide you along the path. Truly, that's what we're talking about today. Find inspiration, find others who will be able to hold your hand, and find others who are willing to listen. That's truly where we are about. We all want to feel loved, cared for, safe and secure in this lifetime. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.